I don't know. We have such a fingers and toes style around Berkshire Hathaway. We just sort of count. And I've never seen, Warren talks about these discounted cash flows. I've never seen him do one.
Yeah.
If it isn't,
there are some things you only do in private, Charlie.
If it isn't perfect obvious that it's going to work out well if you do the calculation, he tends to go on to the next idea.
Yeah, it's sort of it is true. You don't if you have to actually do it with pencil and paper, it's too close to think about. I mean, it ought to just kind of scream at you that you've got this huge margin of safety. I mentioned the three ideas. The three ideas I should elaborate on. One is to think of yourself, to think of investing as owning a business and not buying something that wiggles around in price. And the second one is your attitude, which ties in with that, the attitude toward the market. That's covered in Chapter 8. And if you have the proper attitude toward market movements, it's an enormous help in securities. And the final chapter is on the margin of safety, which means don't try and drive a 9,800-pound truck over a bridge that says, capacity 10,000 pounds, but go down the road a little bit and find one that says capacity 15,000 pounds.
I hate with a passion rewarding anything that can be easily faked, because I think then people lie and lying works and the lying spreads, and I think your whole civilization deteriorates. If I were running the world, the compensation for stress under workman's compensation would be zero. Not because there isn't real stress, because there's no way to keep the fakery out if you reward stress at all.
One problem you can see just by looking at that profile is that if you assume 20% of the bottom 20%, however you measure it in terms of employability, whether it's measured by IQ or interest in working or energy level or whatever you want to do, they fit very well most of the jobs that were available 100 years ago. In other words, you could do most of the jobs, of which there were many, with relatively unimpressive mental abilities. And as jobs have changed, the profile of people hasn't changed. So there are more people that end up on the short end. Now, the good part of that is the society produces so much more that it can take care of those people one way or another. Now, the trick is to take care of them and make them not only feel, but be productive and be part of the act. And we've got enough product to do that. We're not perfect at figuring out how to make the bottom 20 or 30% in terms of abilities fit a new changing job profile. I really recommend you look at that Forbes magazine, because if you think through the implications of those charts, I think you'll see what social problems have to be attacked. Zone 4.
I spoke about having 100 models in your head, but those are all great big models of considerable generality that are useful over and over again. Now, you're down into very complex submodeling when you get into a separate model for what's going to happen in industrial consolidations and retail and so on. And I'm not up to all those submodels.
The truth is, we're up to a few, but we take the general models and plug them in, and sometimes the light goes on, and sometimes the light goes on, and sometimes it doesn't. But if it does, they could be quite useful. If you focus, you do see repetition of certain business patterns and business behavior. And Wall Street tends to ignore those, incidentally. I mean, Wall Street really doesn't seem to learn for very long business lessons. It may not be to their advantage to learn it. That would probably plug right into Charlie's model.
You bet.
Yeah, it's better to if you're out selling the future, it may be better to forget the past if you're getting paid on selling it and not on betting your life on it in some way. One situation at Berkshire that really is somewhat different than many companies, we assume, and unfortunately it's an error, but we assume we'll be around forever. So when we are in our insurance business, we assume we're going to be here to pay every claim. And we're not going to retire at 65 and hand over something to someone else. And there wouldn't be any sense playing games on accounting because it would catch up with us later on. And whereas in many businesses, I don't think they have quite the same horizon on things. They do it at Coca-Cola or they do it at Gillette, but many companies are thinking about what kind of, I'm afraid that more than you'd like, are thinking about what kind of little pictures they can paint for the next 4 quarters or so, and that's easy to do, but our problem is we're going to be around a lot longer, we think, than 4 quarters, so that's not an option available to us, and we really run it as if in the year 2050 or something, somebody's going to look and say, how'd it work out? Zone, where are we, 5 or 6? Wherever the microphone is. Zone 5, we got a mic over there? Maybe that was 6. Okay, we'll go to 6.
If you take Dawkins, The Selfish Gene, and The Blind Watchmaker, I mean, these are marvelous books, and there are words in those books that are entering the English language that are going to be in the next Oxford dictionary. I mean, these are powerful books, and they're a lot of fun. I had to read The Selfish Gene twice before I fully understood it, and there were things I believed all my life that weren't so. And I think it's just wonderful when you have those experiences. We always say it isn't the learning that's so hard, it's the unlearning.
Yeah. I made the mistake of taking Charlie up to Microsoft in December, and he became friends with Nathan Myhrvold, and they are corresponding back and forth with increasing fervor and enthusiasm about mole rats, and they copy me on all these communications, so I'm getting to see this flow back and forth on the habits of mole rats. And I really haven't found a way to apply it at Berkshire, but I'm sure Charlie has got something he's working on that. He's gotten very interested in biology lately. I've always liked reading biography, but since the computer's changed my life, I now find myself playing bridge on the computer about 10 hours a week, and unfortunately, I didn't want to give up sleep or eating or Berkshire, so the reading has been kind of light. On investment books, if you're asking about that, I would recommend the first 2 books that Phil Fisher wrote back around 1960, Common Sense and Uncommon Profits, and the second one. They're very good books. I obviously recommend first and foremost The Intelligent Investor, with chapters 8 and 20 are the ones that you really should read. All of the important ideas in investing really are in that book, because there's only about 3 ideas, and those two of them are emphasized in those 2 chapters.